it's that old thing with updates. Every time they update something, it does it a little differently. So it keeps life interesting, I guess.
Well, it keeps us on our
Okay.
toes, or it keeps us a little bit frustrated, or it just keeps us busy. Whatever kind of engagement it is, it just keeps us going, doesn't it? So,
Well,
to,
it keeps the programmers busy too, because they have to just because something works, they think it has to work better, so they have to update it. I wish once it works, they just leave it alone, you know?
I don't know if nature does
Anyway,
natural updates or not, or maybe it's a human thing that we think we constantly need to improve. I don't
well,
know.
I think it has to, I think it has to do with money primarily, because if it worked perfectly and you never had to fix it, then you wouldn't need so many technicians, and you wouldn't have to pay them as much. So it's kind of like not wanting to make something that will last forever because you need to have another sale down the road, you know. So I think it's all about money.
I think you could be right. I think you could be
Anyway,
right.
uh, I guess however you want to do this, I can tell you kind of what I'm involved in with regard to consciousness studies, and or you can just ask me questions, or we can do a little of both, whatever
Well,
works, I guess.
Dr. Close, it's such a pleasure to have this conversation with you on February the 8th, International Women's Day in Australia, 2021.
Oh,
And because we're a little
yes.
ahead of you, and I can validate the sun is shining. It's an absolutely perfect day outside. Nature has its cues and it's meeting all of them. Um, and what I would love to do is to have you discuss a little bit and explain your relationship with consciousness, because it sounds like you've had extensive experience and that this has been a passion of yours. Um, and then if you could go into what these experiments have been and anything that you would like us to know about the work that you have been doing. How does that sound?
Well, yeah, the yeah, this has been a passion of mine. I first, I would say, I first got really interested in consciousness um, way back when Dr. Stewart and I were roommates uh, in college. We got interested in the new subject then, it was, at least to us, called parapsychology. And that was headed in this country by Dr. J.B. Rhine at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. But David and I did some experiments that were um, very successful and sent them to Dr. Rhine. And he was a very smart, wise man. And he said, um, you should keep, this is wonderful. He said, keep doing what you're doing, but also pursue your degree and get uh, a degree that you can get a job, because there's practically zero demand for parapsychologists. And so, of course, I was physics major, math minor, and David was planning to be a Methodist minister, majoring in philosophy and minoring in English. But we found that we had a lot of interests in common. He had been really interested in science when he was in high school. And so we got interested in this area of mind and matter, interaction of mind and matter. And we found that we had a psychic link. We would finish each other's sentences. I would be sitting in physics class and David would pop into my mind and I'd look up and look out the window on the campus and he would be walking by. And just that sort of thing that got us really interested in something a little more than we were learning. Well, so that was let's see, our first year that we were roommates would have been 1956. 1958, we dropped out of school. We were both honor students, and we decided that we weren't learning what we were looking for in academia. So we dropped out of school in our second semester of our junior year and came down into the Ozarks near where I live right now and lived in a cave for 3 weeks. Well, there's a whole story there with some experiments and things that we did with finding things and the fact that we were reading certain books, I would say, about what's generally called the perennial philosophy. But at the end of the 3 weeks, when my dad came to pick us up, we had decided that we were going to hitchhike to California and meet certain people who were authors and famous people at that time and see what we could learn. So that's what we did. In those days, you could do that. We hitchhiked cross country. I guess you have that, you know, that term, hitchhiking. You go out on the highway and ask for rides to the next town, whatever. Well, we found we met some of those people, and I won't name names because that was a long time ago and they're all dead anyway. But we also found an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No.
It was founded by an Indian national named Paramahansa Yogananda. He wrote a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yes.
And this is not generally known. I'm telling you this, but we were very interested in his teachings and became what are called Kriyavan yogis. practicing a yoga technique called Kriya, and there are several different levels of that. That's basically a pranayam, which is life force control. And as a result of that and some other things, we started awakening memories and things that suggested, and I'll use that term, uh, reincarnation and past lives. I don't know what your religious background is or your beliefs, but all of this. Now, bear in mind, I was the scientist, the physicist, mathematician. So I'm very skeptical. That's part of your training as a scientist, is to be skeptical. So I said, okay, we've found these things that we can do, that we can actually get information that we have no normal way of knowing about. But what can we really call it? Because when you get into consciousness, you find that you can't define it. Max Planck said, you cannot get behind consciousness. In other words, to define consciousness is an impossibility. Well, there's a reason for that. You can talk about all kinds of consciousness, waking consciousness, sleeping consciousness. There's even there are states of consciousness in between waking and sleeping. There are near-death experiences. There are out-of-body experiences. These are all real experiences that human beings have. How do you explain them? Well, there was a physicist named Erwin Schrödinger. He's a Swiss physicist. And he sort of nailed it. He wrote there's a little book that is a compilation of several essays that Schrödinger wrote, and the book is called What is Life? And he goes from being a physicist. I don't know if you know this about him, but he was one of the original quantum physicists, along with Niels Bohr, the Danish quantum physicist, Schrödinger, and Werner Heisenberg, German physicist, who they all developed in their own way the what became known as quantum mechanics. And when they you may have heard of Schrödinger's cat. I don't know if you have or not, but yes, the idea that reality doesn't really happen until it's received in a conscious mind, and that our whole understanding of time and space is something we construct ourselves, that our minds construct, and that in fact, everything that's ever happened or ever will happen or is happening right now is in a multidimensional world here all the time. We don't really understand what time is or space is. Well, now I'll jump a little bit ahead. I got involved with Dr. Vernon Neppy, who is internationally known neuroscientist. He's an MD, PhD, and he had joined an organization called the International Society for Philosophical Inquiry. Actually, it was founded by an Australian named Christopher Harding. And it was for, well, I had been a member of Mensa for many years, but I was disappointed with Mensa because, to be honest, most of the people in Mensa aren't really that smart. They are more on an ego trip of proving to other people how smart they are. And the ISPE had several very interesting in their mission statement, several interesting goals. And among them were longevity, which, you know, the older you get, the more interested you become in longevity, I think. And one of them was cooperating with other people in the high IQ category, because a lot of people who test very high on the IQ score don't fit into society very well. And there are a number of reasons for that. Part of it is that IQ is not the whole story. Creativity is more important than that number of IQ. And so their test took into consideration creativity as well as the standard, Stanford or the standard IQ test that test mostly what's called a G IQ. It's mostly spatial visualization, vocabulary, and reasoning, things like that. So it appealed to me, plus my wife Jackie had purchased a book for me for my birthday that was written by members of ISPE, and it was essays. And I was very impressed with some of those essays because there was one in particular about quantum physics. And by this time, I had written my book, Transcendental Physics. This is the book. You may have seen this, I don't know. Can you see it?
I can indeed.
Yeah, Transcendental Physics. And Dr. Neppy, who I mentioned, had joined ISPE in order to find someone with a creative mathematics background to work with on some ideas he had. Well, when he read my book, Transcendental Physics, he realized we were on the same wavelength. So from about 2008 until present time, so about 12 years now, we've worked together on a model, and he as the neuroscientist and me as the mathematician, quantum physicist. And we wrote a book together called Reality Begins with Consciousness. And that's been reviewed by about 200 scientists worldwide. Um, as a result of that, we've also gotten involved with some other organizations that are doing consciousness studies, including the Rhine Institute, which was founded by Dr. J.B. Rhine in Durham, just called the Rhine Research Institute. I've been on their board of directors, and then another organization called the Association for the Study of Science and Spirituality, which is also in has their headquarters in North Carolina. And then let's see, in 1996, I went to a meeting, the second only at that time, at the University of Arizona at Tucson, called Toward a Science of Consciousness. And there I met several people who were at the forefront of consciousness studies. And one of them that I wrote a chapter in their first volume. They're called the Post-Materialist Sciences. And this book, you probably can't see it because it's not the cover's not very visible, but it's called Is Consciousness Primary? And then there are 12 of us who were more or less the founding members of that organization called the AAPS, the Association for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences. So I wrote a chapter in this and a appendix, where the appendix has the mathematics behind the model that we were working on. Okay, all of this, the kind of important bottom line of this is that in 2011 in Tucson, I was able to prove mathematically that there is a non-physical aspect at the quantum level, that actually atoms, like the atoms of the periodic table, would not be stable except for this third essence of reality. The first two are mass and energy. In physics, there were really only four variables: mass, energy, time, and space. All the other things like density and electromagnetic flux and all these things are expressed in terms of those, some combination or some redefinition of combination of those four simple variables: mass, energy, space, and time.